Hey everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 933. I had the white pieces and started off with d4. My opponent went d5, c4, the queen's gambit, and takes. D takes c4, the queen's gambit accepted. So this is a fine move. It's an interesting way to play even. I think black gets pretty good position out of the main line. And I'll show you how the main line should go. So right here, my opponent goes astray by trying to hold on to the pawn. You can see b5 is a questionable move. But the normal way it's played, just knight f6, e3, defending the e-pawn. The point of this, actually, is to keep solid control over the e5 square and not allow the queen trade here. Sometimes black can get that e5 move in there. And if you have to take with a pawn, they can trade queens and get some kind of position. So you play the knight out and avoid that. Let's see. So black continues with e6, and then you just take the pawn back. And then black can undermine the center with c5, and you can castle. And it continues from here. But there's a position where black did not get to keep the pawn. You don't get to keep the pawn, but he did get some decent development possibilities. Now, with this, if I exchange here, the bishop comes out. The knight has a good square there. I'll probably just castle and let him take. The typical opening advantage to white, but black has a playable position there. Anyway, going back to the game, in this position he played b5, holding on to the pawn. And as is often the case, you try to undermine it with a4. And then he played bishop d7. We're just out of the opening book. I did want to show this line, c6. Because after c6, if you play with e3, which you can see is the most popular move here, this gets into a variation known as the note boom variation, which gives black some chances. So I avoid that. Yeah, I don't play that move. I actually play takes, and then b3, and this leads to you can see we're out of the opening book, but I've checked this out. This leads to a position where you get the pawn back and you have some slight edge. So typical opening advantage. Say best play is e6 here, take the pawn, and then play e3 to round it up. So this isolated pawn over here is weak, and you'll be able to round that up in a number of ways. It's already under fire here, and black is best to just develop here rather than try to hold on to that pawn. Anyway, so that's how I would play that. But he went bishop d7, and so we're just out of the opening book. I went ahead and took. This is often the case that you want to take there when you get the chance. He has to take back with a piece. The piece is going to be a target for the knight moves. Either knight move, knight to c3 or knight to a3 are both good there. But I like to play simply, just get the pawn back. I played c6 to support the bishop, and I went e4. So e4 is a little bit inaccurate. It's better to play e3 and just have that solid center and not have to worry about this e5 move coming at an inopportune time. With e4, it's sometimes a tempo gaining move for black to play e5, and you don't have that pawn as well defended as you might like. So that's why e3 is a little better there. Anyway, I went with e4. Still good for white. He should play e6 here. After which I will just take the pawn, and taking with the knight is recommended. Anyway, he went queen a5 check, which is a second mistake. After holding on to the pawn, that was his first mistake. This is the second one. That's just not good. It just gives me some tempos to kick the queen around. And then I went rook c1. Actually, the chess engine says I'm just winning here with knight takes b5. So let's take a look at this. Knight takes b5, queen takes b5, then rook c1. And just giving up this pawn. If queen takes b2, then bishop takes c4. You look at all my pieces have been developed. I can castle on the next move, and I have control of the center. And I got all of this for one pawn, and black's pawns are weak over here. His extra pawn is that isolated A pawn or the isolated C pawn, depending on how you look at it. So this is the kind of gambit position that you should be happy to play. The chess engine gives us a +7 for white, and it's funny because I played on and there was no immediate tactic. I mean, I kept looking ahead in the chess engine, seeing if I could find some simple explanation of why white is got such a strong edge here. But there's no immediate tactic that wins. It's just that the development advantage is overwhelming here. So you should be happy to play a position like this. In fact, the chess engine is recommending after rook c1 that the queen not even take that pawn and just retreat here. And the game would continue, but also with a big advantage to white, and without even being a pawn down, because the bishop will grab the pawn on c4 in the next move. Okay, anyway, I went with rook c1 right away, so not as strong, but still gets my pawn back and leaves me with an advantage, so not bad. Let's see, he played e6, and I took with the bishop. This actually is a bit of a mistake. Knight takes c4 is stronger. I thought it might be a little bit weird that I would have this bishop here that he could trade off and force me to take back with the rook, probably. Yeah, and then I can't castle. So I thought that might be a bit awkward, so I took with the bishop. But he does have this one tactic. Bishop takes a3 actually is the best move in the position for black, and I have to play this accurately now. I can't just take the bishop, because then I'll lose mine. I have to take here, and then, well, the queen's under fire, so the queen takes back, and then I take his bishop off. So the net of all of this is that I get my pawn back and I have the better position. So I'm still have the advantage here, but my advantage would have been stronger if I'd taken the other way. Anyway, he has to get about developing here. He goes knight e7. I went to queen e2. I wanted to be able to get castled. He could avoid the queen trade. Well, if he avoids the queen trade, then I just castle and there's no problem here. If he plays knight d7, I think that was the chess engine recommendation, leaves me with a choice. I can't castle right away is the point, because that would leave my queen undefended. And if I take his queen, it straightens out his pawn structure a little bit. He'll have two pawns together here, the A and the B pawn. But this is still good. I can castle now, and I have the material equality, and I have a slightly better position. So that is still good for white. He took, and this is even better for white, because now I don't have to worry about castling. I can bring my rook over in one move. Okay, so he got castled here. And in fact, I think I'm already picking up another pawn by force. I don't think there's any way for him to defend the c pawn at this point. He played rook e8 because that knight was under fire, and I just go knight e5. And at any time I can trade this knight off and grab the c pawn, and he can't push the pawn forward. I've got that square covered. Let's see, he played knight a6, so I went ahead and grabbed the pawn. Sorry, he takes back with the rook first. I took with the knight here because I thought I would gain a tempo on his rook. He went rook c7, and I'm happy going into an endgame of pawn up. I just dropped my knight back, and he traded. This also activates my last piece, and so we have this rook and pawn endgame. I guess black is looking to hold this rook and pawn endgame, but I have an active rook. I have good center control, and my king is closer to the action. So this is just a winning rook and pawn endgame, I believe. Let's see. He played g6. He needs to be able to lift his rook off the back rank. So also needs a route for his king to get into the game. So that's reasonable. I come in with king d3. Could have played the rook up right away. Let's see. He went rook b8. So I brought the rook in now. I didn't want my rook going behind the pawn because this pin might allow him to play a move like a5. Got to be aware of little tricks like that. I don't know if that actually works, but this is just a little bit safer, I think. He went king g7, and I went f4 here. And actually, this is maybe not the most accurate way to play this. The chess engine likes king c3, and I think I do too. I end up playing this move later. But I just defend this b pawn, and that frees up my rook to move. Let's see, he could play rook b7, defend the second rank there, 7th. Then g4. This is how the chess engine recommends playing, and f3. Setting up a structure here, king f6, and then rook to c6. So I'm able to activate my rook by bringing my king over here. And yeah, it thinks I have a pretty much a winning advantage in this endgame, but you have to play carefully in the endgame. This is still okay, still keeping a winning edge. He went king f6. I think I always keep a winning edge, actually, but just wanted to show other ideas in the endgame to get the most accurate view. I played g3. I think that's a good move. I want to keep this pawn here, so even when he plays g5, I'm not tempted to take that. I want to keep this solid line of pawns that keeps his king out of the game. Let's see. So after g5, I didn't respond. I just brought my king over to c3 now, so my rook is free to move. He went with h5, and I lifted my rook up to c5. Thought I would get something along this file here, the rank. I could maybe go to the a file, as well as putting pressure in this direction. I was just a little bit worried after going to the a file that he might come out here and check, but I guess my king can step to the side, and if I grab the a pawn, then this will be a passer. So that'll probably be pretty strong for me. Anyway, he traded first. That was reasonable, and then brought his king over to g6. So I played h4 right away. I didn't want him... Well, he needed to defend that pawn. But before I played h4, there may have been an idea of him to push this pawn forward and try and bring his king in somehow. I mean, it's not happening with my rook there, obviously, but the rook might move away from that rank, or want to move away from that rank. So h4 just freezes this pawn where it's in my sights, and he has to defend it. And it also helps control these squares so the king can't step in, even if some of these pawns get weakened. Let's see. So he went rook b6 here. I went b5. I want to be able to bring my king in. He played a5. That's a pretty interesting move. That's a nice try. And here's a second sort of inaccuracy. I just took that pawn, and that helps black a little bit. I could have played king b3 here, because looks like there's no good way for him to defend that pawn. This pawn is securely defended by my rook, and his king is out of play over here. So there's nothing really bad that can happen over on the king's side. And in the meantime, I can march my king up here, and if his rook drops back to get in front of that pawn to defend it, or get behind it to defend it, then I can push my b pawn forward. So this looks like it's a simpler win than the way I played it. Anyway, I took the pawn, he took back, and now he can activate his rook. So he has some drawing chances, perhaps. Let's see, I went with rook g5 check. That was to force his king to defend the pawn and get it one step further away from these potential queening squares here. Then I dropped the rook back to b5, brought it back to b5, so that I could defend against checks from the side. He played the check anyway. Actually, rook b5 was not best there. Let's back up. Instead of rook b5, just going immediately with d5 looks like that's stronger, and another way to win. Anyway, rook b5, still keeping that winning edge. He dropped down. I blocked. He went to a2. He could have gone to a1. Maybe it's slightly better. You know, you want your rook to be kind of as far away from the king as possible, so you have the possibility of checking from behind, or coming over here and attacking these pawns from behind. But rook a2 is pretty much the same, but he doesn't have the possibility of checking my king there. Anyway, now I push on with d5. It seems like this is good timing. He exchanged, and then rook h2. This is the losing move. He could fight on, although I mean, he's still probably losing. Hard to say with complete certainty, but the chess engine gives this line as best play. King g6, rook b2. So he drops his rook down to a1 now. Then king c4 coming up to defend the c pawn. King f5 attacking the f pawn, and rook to d2, getting the rook behind this pawn. And as the computer thinks about this position, the evaluation for white slowly increases. So probably this is a winning king and pawn endgame. You know, I have the rook behind my passed pawn, and he has no good way to stop it. So I think that's a win. But it's a much easier win after rook h2 because his rook is just away from the action, and I can just push this pawn. He's not fast enough now to get back in time to stop it, and his king is too far away as well. His king is outside the square, and the rook, notice my king is controlling this square here that the rook needs to get to block the pawn. Anyway, he took on h4. I pushed, delivered a check, and I moved my king forward, and then he resigned. I mean, if he trades, I was thinking of queening right away, but I don't have to. I can just take the rook and then queen. He can't stop me from queening. So anyway, that was a fun game. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you later. Bye.